After one night of chaos, I had a flash marriage with Alan White, a big shot in the capital. In public, he was noble, aloof, and indifferent. In private, he tore a nightgown of mine every night. On our first wedding anniversary, the woman Alan liked in his youth suddenly divorced and returned to the country. That night, for the first time since our marriage, he didn't come home. That night, the woman he liked said, "It's her good fortune to look a bit like me." That night, I sat in our wedding room with my eyes open until dawn. The next day, I sent him the wedding ring and divorce papers. I also left a note. "Your skills are actually terrible. Bad review, Alan White, I want a refund." Ding! This novel reminds you to click the subscribe button in the bottom right corner to read the complete novel. Alan grabbed my wrist and pulled me out of the drinking party. The capital had just seen its first snow. I'm not used to wearing high heels, and I almost slipped as soon as I stepped on the thin snow. He simply bent down and picked me up. The Bentley nanny car parked by the roadside already had its rear door opened by the driver. The partition inside the car was already raised, and the heating was particularly strong. Alan loosened his tie and took off his suit jacket. In one glance, he saw me curled up in the car seat, having already pulled off the strap of my slip dress. Most of my shoulder was exposed. Cynthia Walsh. Alan almost gritted his teeth as he said my name. The car drove smoothly. In the fluctuating light, I saw his sexy Adam's apple rolling intensely. A thin layer of sweat was on his forehead, and the veins at his temples were faintly visible. Maybe it was too hot inside the car. Maybe there was something dirty in the drink I was coaxed into drinking earlier. Or maybe Alan's face and body were just too perfect. I felt unbearably hot and thirsty. It was like ants were crawling inside my bones, making me itch. I wanted him to hold me, kiss me, to push me down hard like in the books. But Alan's self-control was obviously amazing. He covered me with his suit jacket. "I'll take you to the hospital right away, just hold on a bit longer." But I can't hold on. His suit jacket was filled with his scent. A faint tobacco smell, mixed with contrasting sandalwood. It swirled around my nose. It was like adding flammable oil to burning wood. It instantly ignited into a prairie fire. I threw off the jacket and pulled at the other strap. "Cynthia." Alan turned his face away, his voice a bit hoarse. "Put your clothes back on, did you hear me?" "Alan, are you not capable?" I leaned over and hugged his lean waist, pressing tightly against his hot, firm body. "Do you want to see me suffer?" I said, "We're almost at the hospital." "I don't want to go to the hospital. I don't want to see a doctor." My face was flushed. My reason had long disappeared, burned into ashes. I just wanted him to save me now. "You can clearly help me, why wait until we get to the hospital?" My hand moved from his back to the front and downward. "Are you really incapable, just for show?" I looked up at him, my eyes filled with dazed confusion. Alan didn't say anything. He just suddenly reached out and gently stroked the corner of my eye. "Cynthia." I couldn't help but lean my face against his fingertips. His fingers were long, with distinct joints, and strong. If they touched other parts of my body, I suddenly had a disordered sense of awareness. It felt like this wasn't the cold winter in the capital, but a spring day with surging tides. The air was thick and humid. Alan suddenly lowered his head. His lips were a bit cool, while mine were burning hot. At the moment they touched, I couldn't help but moan softly. Alan suddenly cupped my face, kissed me heavily. "Don't regret it." "Cynthia." My fingers tightly clutched his arm. Under the starry car roof, the light was dreamy and blurred. I couldn't help but tilt my head to kiss him. "Alan, don't rush, it's all yours." After that chaotic and absurd night, I hid from Alan for 3 whole days. 3 days later, he suddenly found me and said he wanted to take responsibility and marry me. Until now, it has been a year since I married him. Yet, I still can't forget how wildly my heart was beating at that moment. I think, in this world, there is nothing more delightful than a young girl's romantic dreams coming true. However, after getting the marriage certificate, Alan took me back to the White family to meet his relatives. It was then that I realized the White family did not want to accept me. But at that time, I was young and impulsive, thinking these things were not a problem. As long as Alan treated me well, it was enough. In the first year of marriage, Alan and I were passionately in love every night, and I don't know how many nightgowns he tore. He always seemed insatiable. Except for my physiological period, he never let me go for a single night. So, I often secretly thought, Alan must love me, right? Even though he never said those two words to me. Until tonight. Our first wedding anniversary. He suddenly lost contact. At 5:30 in the afternoon. I called Alan's phone, but it was turned off. I called his secretary. His secretary said, "I'm very sorry, ma'am, but Mr. White has instructed that his schedule cannot be disclosed to anyone." I sat alone in the wedding room for a long time. I called Alan 17 times. His phone was always off. Later, Alan's cousin Mandy suddenly sent a location to me. "Cynthia Walsh, do you want to know who my cousin's true love is?" I drove over according to the location. Mandy was already waiting for me downstairs. She led me upstairs, out of the elevator, to a private room on the 3rd floor. "Cynthia, come in." Mandy pushed the door open and went inside. The lively atmosphere in the room suddenly receded like a tide. I saw the woman at the main seat at a glance. She looked at me with a smile, but her eyes were not kind. After a while, she spoke faintly, "Are you Alan's little wife, Cynthia Walsh?" Mandy immediately interrupted, "Dora, look, doesn't she look a bit like you?" Dora looked at me for a few more seconds. She chuckled lightly, and when she spoke again, her voice carried a thin layer of mockery. "Having a bit of resemblance to me is her good fortune." Mandy and the people in the room burst into laughter. "By the way, Dora, when is my cousin coming?" Dora smiled shyly, "I'll call and ask." I stood at the door, holding my breath. Alan's phone had always been off. But when Dora dialed, it connected. She looked at me with barely concealed pride. "Alan, when are you coming? Everyone is waiting for you." I seemed to hear the sound of something breaking. The capital's winter was bone-chillingly cold. I had come out in a hurry, only wearing a thin coat. At this moment, I felt completely enveloped by the cold. My heart ached so much I was going crazy. Yet I couldn't cry. As I turned to leave, I heard Dora's soft voice. "All right, take your time and drive safely. See you soon." By the time I got home, it was already 11 o'clock at night. Standing in front of the mirror, my hands were still a bit shaky. In bed, Alan always liked to hold my face. His fingers would gently caress the corner of my eyes. When things got intense, he would kiss the small mole at the corner of my eye over and over again. My eyes are a bit round, with slightly upturned corners and thick eyelashes. Dora also has a pair of round eyes. The only difference is she has single eyelids, while I have double eyelids. Other than that, even the small moles at the corners of our eyes are in the exact same spot. I felt like crying, but in the end, I just looked at myself in the mirror. I smiled somewhat helplessly. I really love Alan White. But I also really hate being treated as a substitute. I dialed Alan's number one last time. This time, his phone was on. But he didn't answer. A few minutes later, he sent me a message. "Sorry, Cynthia, I have something important tonight. I'll be home tomorrow." I sat on the floor, staring at those 2 short lines of text. The screen went dark, and I suddenly laughed at myself. But cold tears fell onto the screen. Just before dawn, I went to Alan's study. I took off my wedding ring and placed it along with the drafted divorce agreement into an envelope. As I was about to leave, I thought about his absence last night. I thought about Dora's lofty attitude. I couldn't hold back. I tore a piece of sticky note and wrote a few lines. "Your skills are actually terrible. 365 days a year, you only know one position in bed. I'm tired of it. You're getting a bad review. And also, Alan White, I want a refund." I called a local courier service to send these things to Alan's company. Then I packed my things and left the marital home directly. On the way to my best friend's house, Alan's call suddenly came through. I hesitated for a moment but didn't answer. A moment later, it was hung up from his side. Alan didn't call again. He has always been this kind of person. Always aloof and proud, hard to approach when outside. Only in bed. Could I glimpse his more human side? Alan put down his phone and called for his secretary. Tell the driver to get ready, I need to go home. The secretary handed over a large envelope. Mr. White, this was just delivered by a local courier from your wife. Alan pressed his temples, his expression seemed to soften slightly for a moment. Give it to me. He reached out and took it, opening it. The ring fell out first. Alan's expression changed instantly. The wedding ring he and Cynthia had was one he had personally designed. He could recognize it at a glance. He picked up the ring and took out everything from the envelope. When he saw the large words divorce agreement on the document, he felt the headache from the all-night meeting intensify. As he reached for the divorce agreement, his eyes fell on the sticky note. Your skills are actually terrible. 365 days a year, you only know one position in bed. Alan's face grew colder. His skills are terrible? Alan lit a cigarette, laughing angrily. Did Cynthia forget? How she messed up his shirt and trousers. How she shyly covered her face, not daring to look at him. 365 days, only one position in bed? Alan thought, if Cynthia were in front of him right now, he would definitely grab her by the nape and press her against the floor-to-ceiling window. Even if she cried and begged, calling him honey, it wouldn't help. He coldly extinguished the cigarette. She really knew how to turn the tables. He shouldn't have been soft-hearted with her in bed. Alan waved his hand to dismiss the secretary. He picked up his phone and called again. But the call was hung up. Alan tried to be patient. He called a third time. But this time, it didn't go through at all. Meanwhile, the servant from the marital home called. Mr. White, we saw on the surveillance that Mrs. White left early this morning. And Mrs. White deleted her fingerprints from all the door locks. Alan felt his headache worsen. He pressed his aching temples. What else did the surveillance capture? Oh, right, Mrs. White also took Lucy with her when she left. Alan laughed angrily again. This was exactly something Cynthia would do. Even in a divorce, she didn't forget to take the dog he bought. She couldn't bear to leave the dog, but she could bear to leave him. He really was less than a dog. It was the third day of staying at my best friend Corin's place. Seeing that I was still in a low mood, she dragged me out to eat hot pot. We also strolled around the mall and bought a few new dresses. I had lost 5 pounds in 3 days, my waist had slimmed down, but thankfully my bust size hadn't shrunk. Corin circled me twice, clicking her tongue in admiration. Our little beauty is still so gorgeous, so fresh you could squeeze water out of her. Don't be sad over an old man. Tonight, I'll treat you to something good, fresh, and energizing. Corin took me to a newly opened bar. But I still wasn't in high spirits. After drinking half a cocktail in silence, Corin urged me to get up and dance. I was about to refuse. Cynthia? A clear male voice suddenly sounded behind me. I turned around instinctively and saw Peter Cox. Peter? You're back in the country? Yeah, just got back the day before yesterday. Peter walked over with a smile. I was just thinking of contacting you these days, didn't expect to run into you. Peter, aren't you going to introduce us? Yeah, such a pretty girl. Peter's smile deepened. He walked to my side and naturally put his hand on my shoulder. This is Cynthia, Cynthia Walsh, the junior I often mention to you. Cynthia, these are my classmates from abroad, you can just call them seniors. I was about to greet them politely. Corin suddenly bumped into me hard. Corin? Corin was frantically winking at me, her false eyelashes almost flying off. I dumbly followed her gaze. In the dim light of the bar, Alan stood not far from me at the bar counter. He was tall, dressed in a black business suit. A matching coat draped over it. Among the stylishly dressed young people, he stood out exceptionally. He stood there quietly, his eyes coldly watching me. It took me a while to snap back to reality. I quickly stepped aside, avoiding Peter's hand on my shoulder. For some reason, my heart was beating very fast. My first thought was whether Alan was angry. I was very afraid of him being angry. Whenever he got angry, as soon as I saw him take off his watch with a cold face, I knew I was done for that night. Cynthia, what's wrong? Peter looked at me with some concern. Maybe because I didn't look well, he reached out to touch my forehead. I hurriedly stepped back, almost tripping over a chair. Peter, being close, timely reached out and held my waist. Cynthia, be careful. But as soon as his hand touched my waist, my wrist was grabbed by someone. Then a strong force pulled me into Alan's arms. His gaze swept over the V-neck of my dress. His eyes suddenly tightened. Alan, let go of me. I frowned and tried to push him away. But he took off his coat and wrapped it around me. I don't want your coat. I glared at him, about to throw off the coat. Alan held me down with one hand. He bent slightly, lowering his head. His breath brushed past my ear, warm and tantalizing. Cynthia Walsh. I'm just too soft-hearted with you. I instinctively opened my eyes. But in Alan's eyes, I saw an extremely terrifying possessiveness. I could even feel it. It was like a fierce beast inside him was awakening. And I would be devoured by that beast, bit by bit. It seemed to have always been like this from the start. He was always in control, high and mighty, while I was ordinary and insignificant. In front of him, I always appeared passive and timid. The fear in my heart was gradually swallowed by grievance. Tears welled up in my eyes. Just as they were about to fall, he wiped them away with a raised hand. We'll settle this when we get home. Alan said this, then took a step forward, shielding me behind him. It seemed like this was the first time he had truly looked at Peter Cox. But it was just a fleeting glance before he looked away. Corin, I'll take Cynthia home first, you guys have fun. Oh, okay, Mr. White. Corin stammered, giving me a look that said good luck. Alan said no more. He naturally wrapped his arm around my waist, about to turn away. Peter suddenly spoke up, Mr. White. Alan paused slightly, his gaze indifferent as he looked at Peter. Mr. Cox, is there something you need? Peter's expression was stern, meeting his gaze without fear. It seems Cynthia doesn't want to go home with you. Alan seemed to laugh coldly. Matters between my wife and me are none of your business, Mr. Cox. Cynthia is my junior and friend from school. As her trusted friend. Trusted friend? Alan's eyes held a hint of amusement as he looked at the man in front of him. When Cynthia and I got married, it seems you didn't even qualify for an invitation, Mr. Cox. Peter's face changed drastically. Alan said no more, grabbing my wrist and walking out. He was tall with long legs, taking big strides. I was wearing small pointed half-high heels and struggled to keep up. In the past, Alan would always slow down to match my pace. But tonight, he seemed genuinely angry. Once we reached the car, I found an opportunity to shake off his hand. Alan White, I've already decided to divorce you. So my matters have nothing to do with you, and I don't need you to care. Divorce? Alan seemed to laugh coldly. So, you're making a fuss because of Peter Cox? What does Peter have to do with this? I was instantly furious. Alan, you're the villain who's twisting the facts. I'm the villain one? Alan's gaze grew colder. Cynthia, you're asking for a divorce for no reason. And you're getting cozy with Peter Cox at a bar. Which of these words isn't true? Alan White. I was both angry and aggrieved. These past few days, I had insomnia every night, lost my appetite. I had lost weight. What was he doing? He hadn't contacted me for 3 days. Always by Dora's side, I bet. Now he showed up, accusing me without knowing the truth. Cynthia, come home with me quietly now. I can pretend tonight never happened. Alan looked down at me. His voice was still gentle, but it was also forceful and cold. My heart felt like it had fallen into icy snow. Cold to the bone. I didn't want to say anything more to him. I had wanted to question him, to scold him. But now it all seemed pointless. I'm not going back with you. Sign the divorce papers, Alan, and we'll see each other at the Civil Affairs Bureau. Having said that, I yanked off his coat and threw it at him. Then I turned and walked away. But Alan grabbed my wrist tightly. I won't sign the divorce papers. I didn't say anything, just tried to pry his fingers off with all my strength. But his grip was too strong, I couldn't budge it at all. Frustrated, I lowered my head and bit his wrist hard. Alan seemed to hiss in pain. But he didn't let go. Instead, he gripped my wrist bone even tighter and pushed me directly into the car. Alan! I pounded on the car door in anger, but the car had already started moving. Alan looked at me coldly. Cynthia, you'd better behave. I'm not going back with you, I want to get out of the car. Alan, this is kidnapping, I'll sue you. He seemed to tug at the corner of his mouth, but the smile was cold. In the confined space of the car, Alan's tall and imposing figure suddenly leaned over. Cynthia, instead of wasting your energy screaming, you might as well save some for the bed. After all, I think you're going to have a tough night. I was stunned for a moment before I understood what he meant. Alan, you beast, pervert. You're not wrong. Alan calmly straightened his sleeve. There's nothing wrong with being a beast and a pervert. It's much more interesting than a gentleman husband who only knows one position for 365 days a year, isn't it? I shut my mouth, feeling at a loss. After all, it was me who couldn't let go, me who was shy. Every night, it was me who insisted on turning off the lights only on the bed and not allowing him to change positions in bed. I was the one who distorted the facts to vent my grievances for the sake of a quick retort. Now that he caught me, I could only stay silent. Alan has always been a man of his word. He said I wouldn't have a good night tonight. Sure enough, from the first second I stepped into the bedroom, my nightmare began. The sofa in the master bedroom was my choice, its fabric had a very grainy texture. But because of that, it didn't take long for my knees to become red and sore. I couldn't help but shake my head and sob, begging him. But Alan showed no sign of softening. Alan. I grabbed his arm, calling his name with a hoarse voice. But the response I got was a heavy slap on my buttocks. Cynthia, this is just the first time tonight. I was stunned by the slap. It took a while before I started crying in humiliation. Alan, you're worse than a beast. I'll go to the police tomorrow, this is rape. It seems you still have some strength left. Suddenly, Alan lifted me up entirely. He turned and walked towards the floor-to-ceiling window. Then let's skip the halftime break and go straight to the second round. Alan gripped my jaw, forcing me to turn my face. His handsome, imposing face was cold and domineering. The desire in his eyes was uncontrollably spreading. I cried until my eyes were swollen, my whole body trembling. I hate you, Alan, you're the man I hate most in the world. The strength of his fingers gripping my jaw gradually increased. Hate me? Alan looked down at me. That handsome, imposing face seemed to be twisted by desire or perhaps by my words, becoming somewhat terrifying. He seemed to have completely changed into another person. Then who do you like, Peter Cox? Does Peter know what you look like now? Does he even know how loving we've been this past year? I shook my head vigorously. But Alan still wouldn't let me go. If it's not him, then who? The boy who had a crush on you in high school? Or the hotel manager who asked for your phone number last time? I just kept shaking my head, too exhausted to deny anymore. I've never liked any other man. I've secretly had a crush on him from the very beginning. But I no longer intended to tell him that. By the end, my vision was blurred. The lights and stars far outside the glass window. The halos were swaying until they shattered. I begged him hoarsely, over and over. In the end, somehow, he coaxed me into calling him honey. Only then did Alan show a bit of kindness. He lifted me from the carpet and put me back on the bed. I didn't even have the strength to open my eyes. I fell asleep as soon as I closed them. When I woke up the next day, Alan was no longer in the room. The daylight was bright. I found my phone and checked the time. It was nearly 11 o'clock. After washing up, I went downstairs and casually asked the servant, "Where's Alan?" Mr. White left very early, seemed like he had something urgent. Oh, when did he leave? Around 5 o'clock in the morning. I paused my action of drinking porridge. There were a few messages from Mandy on my phone. I opened them and they were screenshots of Dora's moments. The moments were posted at 6 in the morning. Some saccharine love quotes that made my teeth ache. Being there for you anytime is better than jewels, houses, mountains of gold and silver. The photo showed steaming porridge, flowers, and cut fruits. Mandy's comment asked, "Does my cousin also have such warm moments?" Dora replied with a shy emoji. Mandy sent me a sarcastic message. Cynthia Walsh, be sensible and give up your position. Dora is kind-hearted, but I'm not easy to mess with. Don't end up with nothing. I didn't seem to be very angry. I even finished all the food on my plate bite by bite. Only then did I pick up my phone and reply to Mandy. Even though she's divorced, she's not in a hurry. Why are you desperately seeking attention here? After sending it, I directly blocked Mandy. Such a clown, I even find it disgusting to have her in my phone contacts. Just as I was about to pack my things and leave, suddenly there was the sound of a car outside. When Alan got out of the car, I couldn't help but laugh self-deprecatingly. Successful people, regardless of gender, are masters of time management. Mr. White is especially outstanding in this regard. He tormented me for most of the night. But he also had the energy to deliver flowers, porridge, and warmth early in the morning. And now he could still find time to come back. I ignored him and walked straight out. Cynthia. But Alan stopped me. He seemed a bit tired, pressing his temples. Have lunch with me. I just ate. I glanced at him. If you have time, remember to sign the divorce agreement. Alan looked at me for a while, without responding. But he handed me a very delicate little box. I apologize for missing our anniversary. But I had prepared the gift long ago. I saw the understated luxurious logo on the box. My heart suddenly ached heavily. I had casually mentioned before how much I liked their jewelry. He actually knew and remembered. But I didn't reach out to take it. The anniversary is long past. Cynthia, I'm really sorry about that day. I looked at him, that face still so handsome it made my heart flutter at first sight. I didn't want to cry, but tears still fell uncontrollably. His tie was still the one I bought. The tie clip, cufflinks, belt, all selected by me personally. When he wore everything I had carefully chosen to meet Dora, didn't he feel even a moment of guilt or unease? Stop fighting with me, okay? Alan touched the top of my head, then lowered his head and gently kissed my forehead. But the more gentle and accommodating he was, the more my heart felt torn apart. His sudden change in attitude must be because he felt guilty. Don't cry, Cynthia. He raised his hand to wipe away the tears at the corner of my eye. As his light kiss fell on the corner of my eye, I suddenly thought of the small mole at the corner of Dora's eye. Instinctively, I pushed him away hard and slapped him in the face. Alan White, don't touch me, it's disgusting. The sound of the slap was loud. The servants in the house were so scared that they fell silent. The driver and the secretary stood aside, not daring to breathe. Alan. I stared at him, wanting to apologize, but I couldn't bring myself to say sorry. He stood still. There was no emotion on his face. He just looked at me calmly. He looked at me for a full half-minute. Then he slowly opened his mouth. Cynthia. A cold wind suddenly blew past. I instinctively hugged my arms. Cold snowflakes fell on my face. Snow fell in the capital. It was the first snow of the year. I couldn't help but think of that night during the first snow last time. If I hadn't met Alan, would he be with Dora now? And where would I be, living what kind of life? Would I be in pain and despair, or would I have moved on? I didn't know. Alan had already returned to his usual expression. Calm to the point of cruelty. There was not a trace of emotion in his eyes. It seemed that this slap had solved his problem. If you have really decided to divorce, I respect your decision. I will sign the papers tomorrow. After he finished speaking, he took off his coat and handed it to me. It's snowing, put this on. I stiffly reached out to take it. And almost the moment I took it, he let go, turned around, and got into the car. The car quickly drove away. The snow gradually fell heavier. I held the heavy coat. I only felt that my heart was completely empty in an instant. The ground was covered with a layer of white. Everything was silent. Yet I heard the sound of my tears shattering. I knew, from this moment on, Alan White and I were completely over. At 10 o'clock the next morning, I received a call from Alan's secretary. "Madam, Mr. White has signed the papers. When would it be convenient for you?" I rubbed my painfully sore throat, the fever making my body weak and limp. But I still forced myself out of bed. "I'm available now." I coughed heavily for a while before I could speak again. "I will go to the Civil Affairs Bureau now." "Madam, there is a section in the agreement that Mr. White said needs further discussion." "Where is he now?" "At the office." "Then I will go to his office now." After taking a pill of ibuprofen, I wrapped myself in a down jacket and went downstairs. When I arrived at Alan's company building and was about to get out of the car, I suddenly saw Dora. She got out of a nanny car, wearing a beige cashmere coat and a matching beret. Her waist was very slim, and she walked gracefully and steadily in pointed high heels. With just a glance, it was clear she was a stunning beauty. Dora's figure quickly disappeared from sight. I got out of the car, feeling dizzy and lightheaded, with my hat and scarf wrapped tightly around me. I looked like a ball. Thinking of Dora just now, I couldn't help but smile self-deprecatingly. Alan probably didn't want to wait a minute longer. So he had Dora brought over immediately. The fever was making me miserable, and my body ached faintly. I really didn't have the energy to think about their affairs now. I just wanted to sign the papers and get the formalities done. Then go home and sleep for 3 days and nights. Alan's secretary came down to get me. As I followed him into Alan's private elevator, I heard some murmuring behind me. "Wasn't Secretary Vince picking up Mrs. White just now? What are you talking about?" "The one who went up earlier is the real Mrs. White." "True, only such a beauty deserves Mr. White." Secretary Vince looked a bit embarrassed and didn't dare to look at me. But I wasn't angry. What they said was true. Dora was a stunning beauty, while I looked like just an ordinary person walking down the street. Alan's office was very spacious, occupying the entire 27th floor. The heating was also turned up high. Alan rarely wore a white shirt. I liked him in a white shirt, but he usually preferred dark colors, so he seldom wore white. Unfortunately, I was feeling too ill to appreciate his good looks at the moment. And Alan didn't even look up. He didn't glance at me at all. My heart suddenly ached. Feeling a bit down, I found a sofa and sat down. My throat was sore and itchy, and I couldn't help but cough violently again. "Are you sick?" A slender hand handed me a tissue. I thanked him and took it. But then, Alan's hand touched my forehead. "Why are you so hot?" His expression turned a bit serious as he walked to his desk and made a call on the internal line. "Get Dr. Foster up to the 27th floor. There's no need to trouble him, I've taken medicine." As soon as I finished speaking, I couldn't help but start coughing again. My lungs felt like they were being torn apart, and my throat hurt as if it were being cut by blades. "Your symptoms won't be cured by just taking medicine." Alan pulled me up. "Go lie down in the inner room, and let Dr. Foster give you in-4 later." "No need." I shook off his hand. "Let's discuss the divorce agreement first." "Cynthia Walsh, stop being childish." Alan seemed to be getting angry again. I simply gave up, shrugged my shoulders, and spread my hands. "This is who I am. Immature, ignorant, unsophisticated, and clueless about social niceties, like an annoying little kid." "Alan, you didn't just meet me today. You're sick, I won't argue with you." Alan seemed to grit his teeth. "See the doctor first, we'll talk about the divorce agreement afterward." "Alan, why bother?" I smiled, holding back the tears that were about to spill over. "Don't waste your time, and don't keep others waiting." Who am I keeping waiting? I didn't even have time to mention Dora's name. There was a knock on the door. Secretary Vince brought Dr. Foster in. With outsiders present, Alan and I had to pause our argument. They took my temperature, which was higher than when I left. But I still refused the 4. I just asked Dr. Foster to prescribe some medicine. After they left, I directly asked Alan, "What's wrong with the divorce agreement?" Alan looked at me for a while. Then he handed me the agreement from the drawer. I saw one item circled. It was the final custody of Lucy. I immediately panicked. We agreed that Lucy would be mine. Before I could finish, I started coughing violently again. Alan handed me water with one hand and opened a bottle of cough syrup with the other. Drink the syrup first. I drank the syrup in one gulp and grabbed his sleeve. Alan, you bought Lucy for me. You said it was a gift for me when you gave it to me. Alan calmly put the lid back on the syrup. Then he said gently, yes, Lucy was my wedding gift to you. But Cynthia, if we divorce, I have the right to take her back. You're unreasonable. I was so angry that I started crying immediately. You said it was a gift for me. How can you take back a gift you've given to someone else? I don't care about anything else, but you can't take Lucy. Cynthia, this is non-negotiable. Lucy is mine, and I won't give her back. Then there's nothing to talk about. Alan turned around to leave. But the office door was suddenly pushed open from the outside. Alan, why is it taking so long? I've been waiting for half a day. Dora's voice was soft and charming. Seeing me, she seemed surprised. Oh, did I come at a bad time? Alan, I'll wait for you next door. Finish your business here, and we'll talk later. She smiled at me, then looked tenderly at Alan before leaving. Alan, don't make her wait without a proper status just because of a dog. What are you talking about? Alan looked at me with some confusion. Do I have to spell it out? I pointed to the closed office door, sign the papers now, and go to the Civil Affairs Bureau with me to finalize the divorce. You can still register with Miss Dora today. Cynthia, what nonsense are you talking about? Alan frowned deeply. This is between us. Why involve others? I laughed in frustration. Alan, can you stop being so hypocritical? Lucy is yours. I will return her. But one thing, please treat her well with your future wife. After saying that, I didn't look at him again, grabbed my bag, and walked out. Cynthia, explain yourself. Alan stepped to the door and blocked my way. Did you misunderstand something just now? Dora came to the company to discuss a foreign project with me. I didn't look at him or speak. I just stared at my toes. Cynthia, if there's a problem, can you just say it directly? All right. I smiled, looking up into his eyes. On our first anniversary, your phone was unreachable all night. Where did you go that night? What did you do? Who were you with? I was in meetings almost all night. Were you in a meeting or on a date? I didn't wait for Alan to speak and continued. That night, Dora called you. I heard it with my own ears. You said you were on your way, and she reminded you to ask the driver to drive slowly. Alan, Miss Dora is right next door. If you still won't admit it, should I ask her to confront you personally? Alan directly opened the office door. Come with me. The door to the adjacent meeting room was slightly ajar. As Alan pushed open the door, Dora's voice rang out with undisguised joy. Alan, you're here. Oh, Miss Walsh is here too. Dora's expression turned slightly awkward. She looked at me, then at Alan. Is there something wrong? Miss Dora, is today the first time we've met? Dora's face suddenly turned pale. Her eyes avoided mine, not daring to meet my gaze. After a while, she forced a smile and spoke. Yes, you've been quite busy since I returned to the country. I was a bit stunned. But Dora spoke again. Miss Walsh, have you misunderstood something? Alan and I have always had a good relationship. I came to the company today just to discuss a project with him. As she said this, Dora suddenly smiled and looked at Alan. Alan, look at Miss Walsh, still like a little child. A child is usually associated with being immature and naive. She was clearly trying to belittle me in front of Alan. I didn't waste any words and directly opened my phone to play a recording. Aren't you Alan's little wife, named Cynthia Walsh? Dora, doesn't she look a bit like you? Even if she resembles me a little, it would be her good fortune. By the way, Dora, when is my cousin coming over? I'll call and ask. Alan, when will you arrive? Everyone's waiting for you. Okay, ask the driver to drive slowly. See you later. With each playback, Dora's face turned a shade paler. By the end, she could barely stand. Secretly recording is illegal. No, this is fake. She used software to synthesize it. Dora's face flushed red as she started to speak incoherently. Whether it's real or fake can be verified. Moreover, isn't Mandy a witness? Alan, why don't you call Mandy over too? I also showed Alan all the messages screenshots Mandy had sent me. She's been causing trouble for so long, and I've tolerated her for long enough. Previously, I misunderstood that Alan and Dora had an affair. I just wanted to divorce and stay away from all these troubles. So I didn't bother to confront Mandy about her actions. But now that the truth is gradually surfacing and Alan and Dora's relationship is questionable, I need to reconsider many things. Alan looked at the information Mandy sent me. Gradually, his face turned cold and stern. After a while, he let out a cold laugh. It seems she's had enough of her comfortable days. Cynthia, I will deal with Mandy's matters later. As for the things she said and the screenshots she sent, I need to clarify with you. First, Dora and I are just longtime friends. Second, there's no such thing as me treating you as her substitute. Moreover, I don't think you two look alike in any way. Third, I didn't receive a call from Dora that night. The call you heard is most likely fake. Fourth, the person she mentioned in that post is not me. You should know very well that I don't have the energy to go out early in the morning to comfort others. I looked at Dora, whose face was ashen. Didn't Miss Dora deny Mandy's comments? Dora was sweating profusely. I didn't say anything. It was Mandy who misunderstood on her own. I just didn't have time to clarify. As she spoke, Dora suddenly glared at me resentfully. Cynthia Walsh, I didn't mention names, you misunderstood and now you're blaming me, isn't that too much? You can't take out your anger on me just because you had a childish argument with Alan and decided to slander me. I didn't say anything, just smiled and looked at Alan. You caused this mess, you deal with it. After saying that, I turned around and walked out. Where are you going? I feel really uncomfortable, I'm going back. Back where? Definitely not to the wedding room. Cynthia. When you handle all these disgusting things, then I'll consider moving back. All right, I'll have the driver take you back first. You're sick, go home and rest well. I didn't argue with him. My health is the most important thing. When I got home, I turned off my phone and went to sleep. When I woke up, my fever had gone, and I felt incredibly refreshed. Lucy was lying by my bed, drooling in her sleep. Looking at her silly face, I suddenly laughed. I cooked a bowl of noodles, ate until I was full, and then turned on my phone. There were calls from Corin and several from Peter Cox. Most were from Alan. I ignored him and called Corin back. Cynthia, you finally woke up. If you didn't turn on your phone soon, your man was going to break down the door. Just as Corin finished speaking, the doorbell rang. I walked over and saw Alan standing outside through the peephole. Next to him was Mandy, with a swollen face, crying miserably. I immediately opened the door. Before I could speak, Mandy started crying and apologizing loudly. Cynthia, I'm sorry, I spoke out of turn. I won't dare do it again. Dad already punished me, look, my face is swollen from the beating. My cousin also punished me. Cynthia, can you please talk to my brother and ask him not to send me to Africa for school? Looking at the usually arrogant Mandy, who never took me seriously, now looking so pitiful, I couldn't help but laugh. But I'm not a saint. Her previous actions really made me loathe her. Sorry, but I hold grudges. Alan had someone take Mandy away. She indeed needs to learn a lesson. Let her endure some hardships, and she'll be more obedient in the future. After Alan said that, he tried to enter the house. I blocked him. Is everything resolved? Everything is resolved. Dora might face charges. Alan's face darkened at the mention of her name. Actually, she came back this time to use my name to scam some deals. I've known her ex-husband since elementary school, and we were good friends. So we're quite familiar. She didn't get much in the divorce, and her family went bankrupt. Her family was very upset about the divorce and demanded a lot of money from her, which led her to have bad intentions. Mandy has always followed her around since she was little and got used by her. I heard she already scammed some people recently, and with Mandy there, they really believed she had close ties with the Whites. Alan sneered. Also, that mole at the corner of her I was intentionally made. It was to make you misunderstand. What? I was truly shocked. I couldn't believe such a reverse tactic existed. But Cynthia, can't you use your brain a bit more? When something happens, without asking me anything, you just push your husband out the door? Alan looked at me with a bit of frustration. Somehow, my eyes started to tear up. Because you've never said you love me. Because I always thought you married me because of that night. And, your family doesn't like me. Mandy and the others look down on me. I'm ordinary, plain, even insignificant, and from a single-parent family. I never dared to hope you'd love me, just a little bit of liking would be enough. But they said you had someone you liked. Tears streamed down my face. I didn't dare ask, I was afraid you'd confirm it. Cynthia, do you think if I had someone I liked, I wouldn't marry her and instead marry someone I don't like? Do you look down on yourself, or do you look down on me? I was just too afraid, too concerned. Then aren't you afraid of making a false scenario real? I guiltily looked away. That would just be my bad luck, but let's be honest, if you could easily choose someone else, it means you'd eventually cheat anyway, and I'd be saving myself from future loss. I think you really need me to teach you a lesson. Alan got angry at me again. He locked the door with a cold face and started taking off his watch. Alan, I'm still running a fever. Huh. He chuckled. Perfect, let me see what you're like with a fever. You beast. I was so scared I turned to run. Alan didn't chase after me. He just took off his watch and loosened his tie. When I reached the bedroom door, with his long strides, he caught up to me in a few steps and pushed me directly onto the bed. One more thing. When Alan's kiss fell, he suddenly stopped. What's going on between you and Peter Cox? I was so angry I wanted to kick him. Alan, do you think if I liked Peter Cox, I would have married you? Maybe you just felt you had to say yes to my proposal because you gave yourself to me that night. Do you know Peter Cox was there that night too? If I liked him, why would I let you take me away? Alan looked at me for a long while. Then he grabbed my chin and kissed me deeply. Cynthia, I believe you. But can you not meet Peter Cox again in the future? Are you jealous? I just don't like other men coveting my wife. Maybe you're just overthinking it. I'm a man, do you think I can't see his intentions? Stop overthinking it. In my heart, I only see him as a friend. Fine, you won't see him again anyway. Why? His project abroad has some issues. He won't be able to return for 3 to 5 years. Alan White. But he had already pinned my wrists down and kissed me deeply. Cynthia, let's try the 5th position now. It's still daytime. How about we wait until tonight? No. Daytime is clearer. He held my wrists and applied slight pressure. I fell into his arms completely. Sit properly. The intimate position made my entire face flush red. The curtains were drawn, but there was still a sliver of light coming through. That light fell right on me, dancing along with me. Alan brushed away the hair falling on my chest. Cynthia. I turned my face away, tightly closing my eyes, refusing to look at him. Do you still want to return me? I bit my lip and didn't answer, just shook my head. But every time I shook my head, he pushed in once. In the end, I could only respond intermittently, no returns. Alan, no returns. What do you call me? Alan. A crisp slap sound suddenly rang out. I couldn't help but choke with grievance. Honey. Don't cry. He kissed away the tears at the corner of my eyes, then his kiss fell on the small mole at the corner of my eye. Lingering and entangling for a long time. A lifetime is long, like a dream. I couldn't help but make a wish in my heart. May this dream never end. May Alan White and Cynthia Walsh be together forever.